They say a picture's worth 1,000 words, but I say that depends on the angle from which you take it. But did you know that in 2023, us humans were predicted to have snapped a mind-boggling 1.2 trillion photos with our smartphones? That's right, trillion with a T. That'd be like every person on Earth taking a selfie 150 times in a year. But I bet you've never stopped to consider how many tiny parts have to work together just to capture one of those trillion pics. Well, whether or not you did, I'm here to satiate that wonder. Get ready to learn how these incredible implements we all take for granted work. Alright, let's kick things off by cracking open this digital camera and checking out all the bits and pieces that make the magic happen. First up, we've got the touchscreen. This is what you use to tap and wake up the camera app and snap your shot, as well as basically every other thing you do on your phone. The screen is constantly measuring tiny changes in electrical fields to figure out where exactly your finger is touching. Kind of like a super sensitive digital spidey sense. Those touch signals zip over to the brains of the operation, the CPU and RAM. The CPU is the phone's problem-solving mastermind, while the RAM is the short-term memory, juggling all the tasks that are happening at any given moment. When you tap that camera icon, the CPU loads the camera software from storage into the RAM, ready to snap. But before you can snap that social pic of what you're about to eat, the camera needs to scope out the scene. It's got a couple of trusty tools for that, the light sensor and laser rangefinder. The light sensor gauges how bright it is, while the laser bounces a beam off your subject to measure distance. They relay that info back to the CPU, which adjusts the electronic shutter and focuses the lens to get the perfect exposure and sharpness. If it's a little too dark, the LED light kicks in to brighten things up. All the while, the camera is preparing a live preview of the action to the screen, so you can frame up that perfect shot. When you hit the shutter button, the camera captures the image and zips it off to two destinations: the screen, for you to admire your handiwork, and the storage to save it for posterity. So you might be thinking,
wow, that's a ton of parts.
And you'd be right. And we haven't even gone over the power supply and all the tiny wires that connect everything together. If you peel back the skin of a smartphone, no, not the one that you put on to keep from breaking the screen every time you drop it, you'd find a veritable maze of circuits called a PCB, or printed circuit board. It's almost like a tiny Times Square, with all the components chatting and sending signals to each other over a labyrinth of copper highways. But here's the really fun part. All those smartphone bits and pieces have a lot in common with your own body. The CPU is like your brain. The RAM is your short-term memory, the wires are your nerves, the battery is your stomach, and the camera lens is your eyeball. Kinda crazy to think about. And we're just getting started. Each of these parts has its own incredible backstory and inner workings that we could geek out about for hours. But we don't have time for all that. So let's zoom in on the star of the show, the camera sensor. Trust me, unless you're a camera expert, you're not going to believe how this thing turns light into digital magic. Alright, let's dive into the real McCoy about what happens inside your camera, how it turns light into pixels. And to do that, we gotta start with a crash course in human eyeball anatomy. Yeah, you thought I was kidding about that analogy? As it turns out, your peepers are packing some serious tech. Light enters through the cornea and lens, which focus it onto the retina at the back of your eye. The iris opens and closes to control how much light gets in, like a biological aperture. And the retina is where the real magic happens. It's covered in millions of tiny light detectors called rods and cones. You've got 3 different types of cones, each sensitive to a different color of light: red, green, and blue. It's essentially a tiny RPG party right in your own eyeball. Now you might be wondering,
if we only have 3 types of color receptors, how do we see the whole rainbow?
I'll tell you how. It's all about the mix. Each type of cone can catch a range of wavelengths, and our brain interprets different combinations of cone activation as distinct colors. It's like mixing paint. A little red, dash of green, and a splash of blue can give you anything from purple to turquoise. With that in mind, let's hop back to our digital camera and see how it pulls off the same trick. Just like our eyes, the camera has a lens to focus light, an aperture to control its intensity, and a light-sensitive surface at the back. But instead of a retina, it's got an image sensor, a silicon chip covered in millions of tiny light detectors called photosites. Each photosite is like a miniature solar panel, converting light into electrons. But to capture color, the sensor needs its own version of cones. Enter the color filter array. This is a super thin layer that sits on top of the sensor with a tiny colored filter over each photosite, and these layers come in red, green, and blue. I might be crazy, but that sounds awfully familiar. But this is a little different. The filters are arranged in a special pattern called a Bayer array. There are twice as many green filters as red or blue. Why is that, I hear you ask? Well, because our eyes are more sensitive to green light, doubling up on green pixels helps the camera capture a picture that looks more natural to us. When light hits the sensor, each photosite measures the intensity of the light coming through its filter and converts it into an electrical signal. The camera's processor then takes this mosaic of red, green, and blue pixels and interpolates it into a full-color image, almost like solving a giant pixel Sudoku puzzle. Oh, but it gets even crazier. The sensor can only capture one row of pixels at a time, so it reads them out line by line, like a scanner. In the time it takes to read out the whole sensor, things might have moved. That's why digital cameras have a rolling shutter effect that can make fast-moving objects look bendy. That's how your camera turns patterns of light into the pics you post on Instagram. But as incredible as all this tech is, it raises some fascinating bigger questions about how we see the world. Like, why do cameras and eyeballs use red, green, and blue instead of some other color combo? Is it a coincidence? Or is there a deeper reason? So, we've seen how both cameras and eyeballs use red, green, and blue light detectors to capture the world in color. But why those three colors specifically? Is it just a weird quirk of evolution? Or is there a method to nature's madness? Turns out, it all comes down to sunlight. The light that reaches Earth's surface has to filter through the planet's atmosphere, which scatters a lot of the blue wavelengths, which is what makes the sky look blue. You know, when it's not cloudy and raining. What's left is a spectrum that peaks in the red, green, and blue parts of the rainbow. Over millions of years, our eyes evolved to be most sensitive to these most abundant colors of sunlight. And when we invented cameras, we naturally designed them to see the world the same way we do. But what if we used different color filters on our cameras? Well, you can actually do that. It's a technique called color filter array swapping. The results look pretty psychedelic, but they can reveal hidden details that our normal vision misses, like secret patterns on flower petals that only bees can see. And here's a fun bit of trivia. Remember how camera sensors have twice as many green pixels as red or blue? Well, there's a sneaky little reason for that. Plants reflect a ton of green light, so doubling up on the green pixels helps cameras capture more detail in foliage. You ever wonder how photographers manage to take such amazing landscape shots? Well, this is more or less a cheat code they rely on. But it also raises a mind-bending question. What if plants are green because our eyes are so sensitive to green light? Like, maybe leaves evolved to reflect the color that our eyes are best at seeing, to make themselves more noticeable to us and other animals. Might seem a little far-fetched, but who knows? And don't forget, this is just on planet Earth. We can only imagine what kinds of crazy color vision aliens might have on other planets with different types of stars and atmospheres. Like, what if there's a world orbiting a red dwarf star where everything is bathed in infrared light? Would the aliens there have infrared cameras for eyes and think we're the weird ones for only seeing visible colors? It's kinda trippy to think about. Don't drive yourself too crazy now. Oh, and I got one more thing before we go. You know how your smartphone screen looks white? Well, it's actually just blasting out a mix of red, green, and blue light at your face. Every pixel is made up of tiny RGB subpixels, just like the photosites on a camera sensor. It's basically the reverse of how cameras capture color. Screens produce color by mixing different amounts of RGB light. Kinda feels like your phone just pulled an Uno reverse there. When you think about how much cutting-edge technology we carry around in our pockets every day, it's amazing how closely it mimics the biological wonders that evolution has crafted over millions of years. From the intricate optics that focus light to the mind-bending mysteries of color perception, the science of digital imaging is full of fascinating rabbit holes to explore. And the deeper you dive, the more you realize that even the most mundane selfie is actually a masterpiece of physics, engineering, and the incredible sensory apparatus that is the human eye. Full disclosure, if I had to pick one sense to lose, I guarantee you it would never be sight. So the next time you whip out your phone to snap a selfie, take a moment to appreciate the sheer wizardry that happens behind the scenes when you take that photo. And if you want to keep geeking out about the hidden worlds of technology, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. We've got a ton of other mind-blowing videos like how are images compressed and how do smartphone CPUs work. Content sure to keep your neurons firing on all cylinders. Until next time, keep questioning, keep marveling, and keep snapping those trillion-pixel masterpieces. Now get out of my way, I gotta take a picture of my dog.